we realized that storytelling is probably one of the most important, if not the most important aspects of how you build a business.
Hey everyone, my name's Sean Donnelly. I'm a creative director at Corduroy Media, and welcome to Creative Direction. This is a podcast built by creative professionals for creative professionals. And today we have Marcello Grande on stage, the Chief Strategy Officer and all-around creative badass at First Person, a narrative agency here in Oakland. Marcello, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
I wonder if you can just define what First Person is today and what you all do.
Sure. So when we started, First Person was really, I would say, maybe a design and motion studio, still trying to figure out how to own the ideas. And then we kind of moved to design and storytelling company and have been that for quite some time. But I think today, First Person is really more of a narrative transformation company. Mm-hmm. Design is always at the heart of what we do, but not just visual design systems. And so I like to think that First Person is one of the only companies in the world that really prioritizes story as a business tool and helps organizations figure out, how do we treat story as a foundational piece of how we're going to be successful.
We've been working together for 13 years.
Something like that,
13, yeah. 14 years ago. One thing, when I first met you, we were on a shoot. I was working camera. You were directing. You also were drawing on, you were actually doing some practical art. But the thing that's so much more valuable that I've seen you do is how you work with people. That confidence of being able to connect with people, be in those different situations. Take me back in time, where do you feel like you got that from? Was that something from your experience growing up, or?
Yeah, so I grew up in a kind of a wild household, right? So if we go all the way back, my grandfather and my mom and 4'10" redhead, super fiery. My grandfather was an entrepreneur, my mom as well, and they were never shy to share their feelings and sort of speak their minds. But my grandfather really taught me about business, and every once in a while I'd go with him to his office when I was a little boy. And I would see him on the phone, and he would just pick up the phone and he'd call somebody in Asia or he'd call somebody in the Midwest, and he'd just say, this is Harry Bank and this is what I need and this is what I can do for you. And he was just making deals all day long. Those conversations at home, there's sort of just like the honesty and the yelling. And I also have a brother, a stepbrother, a stepsister, and a multitude of step parents. Yeah. And it was always just loud in the house, and so you had to kind of say what you needed to say if you wanted to be heard.
So you have that business influence. That's really interesting. What were your creative influences early on? Where'd you get your creative voice from?
I idolized my grandfather, seeing that he was an entrepreneur, and knew from a really early age that I wanted to have my own business. In terms of creative, when I was a kid, I loved art, and I saw myself as an artist, and so did all the things that creative young people do, right? And at a certain point, I sort of fell in love with animation and cartoons. And on this trajectory, right, I'm born in the late 70s, hip hop became the language of my youth. For me, the stories that were being told in this music sort of impacted and influenced my art tremendously and helped me to kind of get in touch with, I guess, all the stuff you go through as a kid when you're just sort of growing up and you're feeling the angst of growing up and what it means and seeing what's happening in your neighborhood. And that literally became my culture. And so my art started to translate into street art, into graffiti art pretty early, probably around the third grade. And then when it came time to figure out, what do you do with that, right? I started getting in trouble, which didn't deter me, but my parents took notice. And my mom was like, look, I know I'm not going to be able to stop you from doing this, but what do you want to do with your life? She has always been really supportive of my art. And so she contacted some folks at a company called Film Roman, which is an animation studio. They did Bobby's World, Garfield, and The Simpsons originally, and reached out to them and said, hey, my kid, he's creative. Can you give him some advice? And I met a woman named Phyllis Craig. And Phyllis Craig was a legendary animator with Disney Studios. She was the first female animator. She worked on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and she kind of took me under her wing. And she was just like, I love what you're doing. She like critiqued my graffiti book, my black book, introduced me to like all the other heads of the studio. I think I was probably like 15. And at that point, I kind of knew I wanted to do animation. And she's like, well, look, if you want to do animation, this is great, but this isn't going to get you to do animation. You've got to go to the zoo and draw animals. You got to go draw people. You got to carry this book with you everywhere. You already do, but you need to start drawing what you see. And then she would write me a letter every single month and ask me how I was doing and encourage me. And it worked. You know, I was hardcore into graffiti, but I remembered to do all those things that Phyllis encouraged me to do. And so that kind of got me into Cal Arts, where I studied experimental animation and discovered graphic design. And that sort of was the beginning of, okay, now I can see how to take this passion I have for hip hop and graffiti and start to figure out what does it mean in terms of developing personal style? How do I translate that into a career, which I was still trying to figure out at the time.
Talk to me about like what you loved about that hands-on work and actually being like the hands of the artist, being, you know, the creative who's actually doing the work and putting out content.
Yeah. I loved it. I mean, going back to the school era, when I first went into Cal Arts, I thought, oh, I'm going to be a character animator. But right before I went in, I realized, no, I don't want to work for Disney. It's too rigid. Like I don't have the ability to just sit down and just do one thing over and over again and, draw frame after frame. And I had done it prior to getting in. I had been in some programs and realized that I wanted to do something that was more design driven. So my career was focused on what's called experimental animation, which is really was just like, hey, it was a métier that was like, you can bring anything to life through animation. And this was the beginning, like right before sort of the computer revolution. So when I first got into school, everything we did was analog. And somewhere in there, all of a sudden, it was like the Macintosh came out. I think it was the G3. And out of necessity, because I was too young and I wasn't a master student to get access to like all the high-tech equipment at school, I was like, I got to get one of these machines. And by the way, I had never used a computer before in my life. Like everything I did up to that point was analog. I was working for hip hop record labels, designing jewelry, doing album covers. Like I was working all through school and doing all these interesting things, but it was all analog, The most digital thing I would do is I'd scan something in and I'd give it to my buddy who could basically like trace it in Photoshop and we'd get it to like the jeweler. So when I got this machine, which cost me so much money back then, I remember there was no Apple store. You called up Apple on the phone and you're like, hey, I want to buy the best computer you have. And they're like, oh, what features do you want? How much hard drive do you want? I'm like, load it up, right?
Give me the user manual too,
yeah,
please.
Exactly. Well, the cool thing is that at that time, because it was so new, they gave you all this stuff for free. So Adobe had this thing that they were testing called Premiere. And Kosa had a tool called After Effects, which I think was on like version 1.2. And so they sent me all this stuff. And then people would call me and they'd be like, oh, well, we heard you just bought this Mac. Like, we'd like you to try our software. And I was like, well, what does your software do? And they're like, oh, it's for animation. And my eyes lit up. And so I spent a long time trying to figure out how to like get into those early digital tools. And before I knew it, I was doing this thing that didn't have a name called motion graphics. So I was taking like letters and graffiti forms and things that I was interested in and just trying to figure out how do you make them move on a timeline. And I had learned how to edit analog, so I knew what editing meant. I love music. By the time I got to my junior year, I was like, this is awesome, except I have no idea how to make money doing this. Like really, I was totally lost. So I took a sabbatical. I went to UCLA. I joined their graphic design program. And they worked on the quarter system. And so I like rapidly did like 2 years of UCLA. And I got hired by both of my professors to work at their firms. One of them had like a classic design firm. And the other, he had a motion graphics studio. And he was a dude who had worked for Disney on Tron. And he was like, hey, we're doing this big project for an architectural firm. And like, do you want a job? And I was like, yes. And so I helped make an animation that basically was the bid for Cal State Northridge's like, revitalization. Mm-hmm. And after that, I was like, okay, I get it. This is how I'm gonna make money. So I went back, I graduated, had like a whole new perspective on like what it meant to kind of take this craft and, apply it to commerce. And then my goal was I wanted to be a title designer. I basically went to film school, right?
Yeah, you're
9
thinking
hours.
still more traditionally, like how can this go into the world of you're experimenting with new media in the creation, but the output, you're still thinking of kind of traditional media in terms of broadcast or.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Well, so there's so much more to the story. We did a 12-hour podcast with me. That would be boring. But I did go to film school. I made a lot of music videos. I worked for Geffen and Interscope. I worked for Warner Brothers. I did a lot of stuff during this period of time. But I always loved films and filmmaking. It was really something I was deeply passionate about. All I wanted to do was be Saul Bass. To me, that was like, look, this allows me to translate what I loved about graffiti. And by the way, I was still doing graffiti at this point in time. Letter forms, graphic design, and motion graphics, bring them all together to introduce the audience to what this film, how it feels, right? To kind of bring the audience in and get them to like calm down in their seats and get ready for something incredible. So I put all my energy into getting a job there were really only two places I wanted to work: Imaginary Forces and Pacific Title and Design. And I went into Pacific Title for an interview, and they literally called me back the next day, and they're like, "Guess what? You got the job. You're gonna be our art director, and you're gonna be responsible for like all international releases." And I was like, "Whoa, this is the dream job."
Yeah, that's amazing. So like this era of motion design that you kind of went into, I mean, that was like, this is a groundbreaking era because this is actually motion design as filmmaking and short form storytelling.
Oh yeah.
Talk to me about like your story ethos of like bringing some of your early influences into more of like the animation storytelling and the direct to client brand storytelling work.
So I moved to San Francisco in 2003. I had already started my first company in Los Angeles. It was called Westernized, and it was directly born from my graffiti crew name, right? So at the time, I was doing whatever jobs I could do, but I was doing a lot of motion graphics, and I was doing a lot of commercials. People would hire me to do like the end tags of commercials, and when we all started, we were doing whatever we could get paid to do.
Sure.
But I deeply valued sort of the traditional physics of animation, making things feel like they were moving with purpose. And so when I came up to San Francisco, like I discovered this entirely new world of advertising that I just wasn't a part of when I lived in Los Angeles. And a lot of what was happening here was technology. And I realized that I was like, I like technology. Technology is really cool. Like I've become so invested in the computer. And at that time, I was testing software all the time. I knew all these software companies. I had built good relationships with them because I kept testing equipment. We were trying to elevate whenever we possibly could the quality of what we were seeing. And a lot of technology companies had sophisticated technology. This is like, say 2003, 2004, 2005. But their understanding of how to use design and motion graphics, like in the enterprise world, it was really, really immature. They didn't care. There was a lot of spoofs that we were seeing. Let's spoof Star Trek for our sales convention. Really bad quality compositing, really bad animation. And for a lot of these companies, at least in my experience, it was good enough. It was good enough. And so as soon as we had an opportunity to work for anybody, it was like, let's put our heart and soul into making this thing incredible. And I feel like the first experience that I can really remember that made a difference was, my brother is my business partner, Brandon, and we used to work out of our house and out of our basement. And I want to say this is like around December, I think it was maybe like 2005. And we get a call from this company, big digital agency. And they're like, look, we got this project. It's for Shell Oil Company. It's going to go over the holidays. And like, we don't want it. We're not working over the holidays. We're closed for like 3 weeks here. You guys want it? And we were like, yeah, absolutely. And I remember like, we just worked probably like 23 hours a day on this thing through like the entire month of December and January, and gave Shell Oil back something that's like really amazing with characters, and it was kind of like an interesting like newscast with motion graphics, and it was a fun story. And they were like, we've never seen anything like this. This isn't like what we normally get unless we're doing like commercials. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And so they introduced us to Cisco. And that was where I think it really kind of expanded. So we were working with Cisco. At the time, they had been like buying up all these like consumer technology companies, and they were really doing a push towards making video ubiquitous in the world. But they had asked us to create some ads for them. And as we were doing that, one of the tasks was making an animated logo. And well, actually, that wasn't the task. They gave us an animated logo, and I thought it was garbage. And I remember being on a phone call with Brandon, my brother and business partner at the time in our little fledgling company, and the like global creative director at Cisco. And I told him that their logo sucked. And Brandon, I could hear the air like go out of his voice on the phone. And he's looking over at me. He's like, they're gonna fire us. And luckily they didn't. The creative director said, well, if you think you can do better, why don't you show me? And that really kind of became the beginning of us working with this guy who I'm still friends with to this day, showing them something better. And what it led to them trusting us to rebrand Cisco. And that rebranding of Cisco represented, from my perspective in Silicon Valley, a really monumental moment where one of the largest enterprise organizations in the Valley took design seriously.
So as you moved from becoming, an animation design company to really thinking about storytelling strategy and narrative strategy, was there a specific moment or experience or project where you were able to, start to transition that? Or did it go slowly over time through just like having the right conversations, asking the right questions?
It's a great question. I think it's more like suppression, right? So for the better part of a decade, we built a successful business doing something we didn't expect to be doing and really enjoyed it. And there were really incredible lessons to be learned there, and met amazing people. And it shaped so much of my understanding of business. At the same time, you're sort of in it for so long, and then you realize, wait, this isn't necessarily why I got into this business to begin with. And so in the beginning, you're just struggling to try to make it. And you get to a point where you're like, well, I think we're making it. Like, look, we have all these clients, but are we happy? Are we doing the thing that we set out to do? And in some ways you say, well, yeah, we checked that box. We did that. Look at all this incredible work. There's amazing people around us. Like, people call us all the time. They love what we do. But as I think creators and even as entrepreneurs, saying, you know what, at this point, we understand technology really well. Like, we are invested in technology. And I think that we can do way better if we cut out the middleman. And so I think it just sort of, it wasn't one experience. It was a multitude of experiences where we felt like we could have done so much more, but were prevented from doing that. And we were so far removed from the people who were making decisions that we were powerless. And so, we just kind of woke up one day and, we were about to be acquired by another well-known company that's still around today. And Brandon and I were sitting there literally about to sign papers, and somebody said something kind of offensive, not myself, not Brandon, but it got us thinking that like maybe this wasn't the deal that we thought it was. And so we walked out of that deal. We just got up and said, hey, thank you very much, but we're not going to do this. And we walked away. And, we had a great experience with our other business partner, who at the time I would say was a competitor, but he was a good guy. And so I wrote him a letter and was like, hey, good guy. His name's Drew. I said, we had a great experience together, and we're looking for a new home. And I kind of gave him a little clue into what was going on. I said, if you've got room for us in your building, because he had this massive building in the Soma, we'd love to come and have a place to work, because we've outgrown our basement. We had like 8 or 9 people working in there. It was a little crazy.
So San Francisco. It's like such a San Francisco
Yeah,
story.
San Francisco. And he said, sure, we've got plenty of room in our building. Why don't you come by? We did that. He said, hey, as long as you guys agree, gentleman's agreement, not to like go after our clients, and we'll do the same with you. Like, we'd be happy to have you here. And so I think literally 12 days later, we were like sharing resources, talking about how to like combine our technology and our back end and render power. And then we sat down one morning over coffee before anybody came to work, and it was like, so what do you want the future to look like? And we just got into this really interesting conversation and found that we were having the same kind of feelings, right? Like, it was like an existential experience for creatives, saying like, it's not enough.
Not enough. Yeah.
And we spent a couple of years offsite planning for what the future would look like and what this new company would look like. And it wasn't clear then. It was so simple. It was just like, we want to move from execution to ideation. That was it. Can we do that? And then as soon as we did it, like, it was incredible and it was scary, and also we lost all of our clients because they were all agencies. Yeah. And so we made a formal announcement. We told them, and some of them were like, hey, good luck. We can't work with you anymore. We're now technically competitors. I think we kind of knew that was going to happen. And some of them were super pissed. They were super angry. But yeah.
It's such a risk, man. So it's like, yeah, that's like part of your story is like, it's that rebel spirit, like, always comes through.
If you can't bet on yourself, like, go home.
Well, it's also this, like, I mean, you see it now more than ever, like, being safe is the risk. If you're staying like within the confines of what's comfortable to you in the creative world, like, you're going to be, gone. Your time's limited.
We realized that storytelling is probably one of the most important, if not the most important, aspects of how you build a business. Mm-hmm. And every time we were brought in to that position of ownership of an idea or asked to share our perspective, we realized that an organization with incredible technology, like really smart people, processes that just would blow me out of the water, resources out the wazoo, was still lacking the fundamental ability to put those things in some sort of order that would tell the world, here's why we and only we can do this incredible thing. And so we started to get brought in to help them figure that out. And then we were invited to the table at General Electric when they spun up their software center in San Ramon, California. And there was a CMO there, John McGee, who worked for a cybersecurity company that we had worked with for many years. And he said, listen, we're doing something that nobody else has ever done in the world. It's new, it's incredible, it's gonna change everything, and really like your help figuring out how to tell the story. We're gonna be one of the biggest companies in the world, but right now there's only 40 people working here. And so Brandon and I went down there. We went to this massive building. I didn't see 40 people. I saw like 4. And they tried to explain what it was that they were doing. And what that thing was the industrial internet, but it didn't have a name. And they asked us if we could help them figure out how to talk about that. And that led to being invited into the room at GE to launch all of their digital businesses, to work with their various CEOs and their chief digital officer, kind of on a world tour, to write speeches, to create keynote presentations, to create experiences, and help them figure out how to get, these industrial organizations that had been analog for, since the Industrial Revolution, to become digital native companies in, the beginning of this sort of new wave of tech, the digital industrial revolution, Industry 4.0. And they trusted me a lot. And in that experience, that's where I figured out these are the parts of the process that should be repeatable and applicable elsewhere. And I started reading as many books as I could about storytelling and, about the process of doing all this work. And nowhere did I see anything tactical or functionally strategic about how do you translate big ideas into something that you can apply in an enterprise. And the more companies that we walked into, the more we saw the same symptoms.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's amazing because you have obviously so much technical experience and artistic experience. And ultimately it comes back to storytelling is the most powerful tool that humans have ever created to change
Absolutely.
minds. I mean, you cannot change a mind. You can't move an army. You can't create peace. You can't sell a product without this thing that this is the way in which humans have evolved and communicated and like share moral lessons. And it's just amazing to like, as such a powerful thing to tap into.
We hear all the time now that we're in an attention economy, and I disagree. I think we're in a belief economy. Like an attention economy is hand raising, it's waving, it's like pay attention to me, look at me, look at me. But how long can you do the look at me when somebody else is look at me over here now? And so a belief economy is where storytelling really takes hold, where you use the most ancient tool that we have as human beings to tap into the emotional power of connection to get someone to believe in what you're doing in an authentic way so that their attention stays on you. And there's no other way to do it, in my opinion, from what I've seen. Like, you can have the best technology in the world, and you probably should. You can have the best people in the world, the best processes in the world. All that stuff, that's table stakes today. And with AI, all that stuff is just happening, for better or worse, so much faster. So from my perspective, the only thing you have left is to create that authentic connection and build belief with your audience.
I mean, it goes back to culture, like what you're talking about, like going back to hip hop culture, right? Like look at the way that people represent brands, and obviously B2C has known this forever, right? Like the Nikes, the Patagonias, you can point to the best where it's like, this is representing my identity and what I value. I don't care about how much stitches in the jeans or the jacket.
Yep.
You know, this is representing me and what I stand for from a values perspective, you know, and that's like the power of story, to me, the power of storytelling and brand. I'm curious, is like specifically working in the B&B world, are there any examples for you like where brand has become that strong around culture and value, either stuff out in the world that you've seen that you feel like is really successful or you've worked on, where they have been able to tap into that in the same way?
It's different, but it's the same. So in a B2C world, we've learned so many things, but one thing we can't forget is that the cost of buying a Coke or buying even an expensive Gucci suit pales in comparison to the cost of implementing almost anything in a B2B environment. And it's not just the cost, it's kind of the ripple effect. So you buy the new flavor of soda from the soft drink company and you hate it, you dump it out and you move on. You buy the new flavor of B2B software and trust the company and roll it out in your organization and teach everyone how you use it, and you hate it and it doesn't work.
There's your career.
Yeah, exactly. So the stakes are really different. But in terms of belief and in terms of branding and culture, I think that one of the things that's the same is that if you can solve a problem for your customer that nobody else can solve in a way that allows them to kind of retrain their attention on the thing that they're there to do in the first place, you're building that authentic connection and they're going to love you for that.
I want to talk to you a little bit about storytelling and how you approach it at first person.
Okay.
You all talk about story at the center a lot.
Yeah.
How is that different than, you know, say a marketing strategy of like, we're going to talk story. We know our narrative. We know storytelling is important, right? I think a lot of companies understand that and communicate their story and their narrative. What's your approach there when you talk about story at the center, and how is it different?
Story at the center isn't something we sell. It's really just, it is a system and a model to help take something that's abstract and bring it to light so that when we sit down with a client, we can say, look, if you really want to be successful in how you use this story to build belief, this is a model that you can follow. And so what it is it's the combination of vision as strategy, right? What is your true north? What is the whole reason you exist as an organization? And what is it that you are trying to achieve in the world that your customer is going to connect with? You can think about this as sort of archetypical. It's not a vision statement per se, although it becomes that, but it's really about, why does everybody show up and come to work here every day? Because you're making something that we can't just build tomorrow. It's the long-term goal. Then it's category strategy, which is really about where do we fit in this world, and how does that vision sort of, you know, become part of the way in which we fit into the market that we serve, right? So this is really a business concept. And then how do we talk about it through strategic narrative? And strategic narrative is different than messaging in so many ways. This includes anything and everything about your organization, your customer audiences, how to communicate with them, the markets you serve, your category point of view. And that we call story with a capital S. But the real value is aligning leaders and employees around those three fundamentals and ensuring that if you're in sales, if you're a product leader, marketing, C-suite, that you all have a stake in that story, that you all agree that it's right, and that you understand how to translate it through all the different parts of the business that you own. That's the biggest problem that companies have, is that they've got a story, but it's buried. It's being told in 10,000 different ways, and it's hurting them. That fractured story, I won't get into the numbers, but I've got a lot of them. The fractured story is costing companies so much money. And every time they bring a new leader in, and unfortunately, a lot of times it's the CMO. The CMO bears the burden of being the person who's supposedly responsible for this. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a marketing problem, because your story isn't just about marketing. It's again, it's about that authentic connection to your customers. But if your chief financial officer isn't invested in that, and your chief technology officer isn't invested in that, think, oh, it's not my job. Like, I don't need to know about story. I do something else. You can't be successful.
Yeah, that's so. I feel like you're such a perfect person to play this role, because you have those influences, around your genesis story of like the business grandfather and the creative influence of hip hop and graffiti and all of that. When you're going into these ivory tower worlds, right? That, is a different world that speaks a different language than like art and creativity. How do you go about translating that? Like, ultimately, I feel like if I could sum up your story in a way, like you're a creative translator, right? Like, how do you go about making sure that this worth of story is communicated and get these folks who don't speak that language to buy in and understand how important it is?
They do speak the language most of the time. They just don't necessarily understand how to equate it to their day-to-day role. So when I walk into a lot of those rooms, it's not as ivory tower as you would think. I mean, a lot of times there's an understanding that something's not working. It's just not clear what it is. Oftentimes the signals will come from customers, they'll come from analysts, they'll come from investors, or they'll come directly from a new C-suite leader who says, hey, look, I've been here for a while, and I was brought in to do the following, and here's how I see the future. But I'm having a really hard time figuring out how to tell that story to my employees and how to share that with the world in a way that is credible, that we can defend. I think oftentimes it has a lot to do with listening. It's therapy. It's a therapy session. It's like, look, like, tell me how you feel. Tell me what's not working. Tell me where it hurts, right? And then it's taking all that information and asking those same questions to a lot of the other leaders to kind of understand what's the 360 spectrum here. How does marketing feel? How does sales feel? Where have they been successful? Where have they not been successful? And then bringing that all back together really candidly and doing kind of group therapy, right? It's like, it's really easy to listen to one or two leaders say, this is how it is. And then you talk to the rest and you find out, well, that's part of how it is, or that's how it is for you, which is totally valid. That's not how you're going to be successful as an enterprise out in the market. One of the things that we hear a lot when we get into our workshops is our clients will often be really surprised and say, wow, you know so much about our business. It feels like you work here. And it's a really big compliment, because what we want to do is we want to come in as, I say we're tourists, right? We'll never know the culture and language of your unique place in the world as well as you do. But we want to be really good tourists. We want to be really good stewards of your organization, of your brand.
One of my favorite things about the way you approach this is, such a focus on making sure the employees understand and feel the story and the value. It seems like in your framework, it's just as important as
So much.
when you're marketing to the consumer, which is really interesting to think about. Do you feel like they're equal, or it's almost like that employee belief feels like it's so integral to the way you're approaching?
They are equal. Yeah, I mean, if your employees are like, yeah, no, this is nonsense, like we don't believe this at all, how are you going to be successful? And we all know like this process is lengthy to do it right. Most of the time, something like this starts at about a quarter, maybe a half a year. By the time it's all said and done, these big transformation projects can take a year or more. But when it's done right, these companies, they dynamically change. A lot of times it's like a new lease on life. They're pumped up. They're communicating in a totally different way. They're excited. You see their stock price rise. You see the analysts, move them in the various tools that sort of identify where does this company sit in the world. So it's a really powerful tool, and it all came from working with GE and seeing that they needed this, but I had no tools to solve the problem back then.
I wonder when you're putting together narrative and story, like just being a little tactical.
Sure.
Are there storytelling rules that you feel like that you really try and live in? And like for example, I totally have a storytelling cheat sheet. Like I have a running Google Doc where I'm like, read something cool. I'm like, oh, story. If I get stuck, I'll like go refer to it and be like, oh yeah, this storytelling rule. I love that. Anything that you feel like when you're putting together narrative or story that you feel like these are really important elements?
So we do have a whole bunch of different systems and frameworks and structures that we apply, but I think it's more just about recognizing the difference between something that has lasting power, that can sit under the surface, and something that's fleeting, and just being objective with ourselves and saying, wait a minute, have we accidentally given the client something that's going to be irrelevant next quarter? Or have we given them the tools that they need to be successful in the long term, which is our goal?
Nice. How about what are some things you wish that more folks who are in the C-suite knew? What advice do you have for them when they're approaching creative work?
One thing that I would say that I would love more C-suite leaders to understand is the massive power of putting like a real brand film or a future casting film out into the world to show the world how you're changing the future. It's one of the most underrated tools. They tend to be a little expensive to do them correctly, but the return on investment for these stories when they're done right, I've never seen it backfire. I see, we used to do quite a few of these stories when budgets were a little bit different, and some of them completely changed the organizations forever. Mm-hmm. And so I remember a story we did for VMware, right? So VMware came to us and they wanted help sort of figuring out their storytelling strategy, advertising strategy for, let's call it the next 2+ years. And they had a very specific set of criteria for why. They saw a dynamic shift in the world from network virtualization to application and cloud packets and sort of Kubernetes. And what that meant was that they knew that even though today they were super successful, that a decade into the future, their core audience was likely going to change, become younger, and rely on a very different tool set. And the business that they had built foundationally was still going to be there, but it would be so ubiquitous that it wasn't going to generate the same level of revenue. And so they came to us to figure out something super creative. They had hired a multinational agency to do this work, and it didn't work out because they weren't technical enough to really understand the underpinnings of what they did. And so we put together a future casting piece that positioned VMware as the foundational technology layer in the story of a young girl's life who uses her mobile device for just about everything. And I think the magic of a piece like this is that it's not science fiction. We're not talking about something that's like fast forward 20 years. Mm-hmm. This is like, hey, let's paint a picture of something that, based on the trajectory of the technology in the world today and what we specifically are enabling, is likely to take place in the next 5 to 7 years. And that's exactly what it did. Mm-hmm. And what's incredible about films like this, and we've done many of them, is that they also show your other B2B technology partners and customers ideas for how they can participate in this new economy in a way that they might not have been creative enough to figure out on their own. You're giving them an opportunity to see themselves in your story and to reach out. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very potent, because when you just tell somebody what the future is, they might not be able to see it. I mean, look, most people are not very visual. There's lots of different types of creativity, but showing something to somebody and making the abstract tangible, it's a very, very potent tool.
I totally agree. I mean, it's such a powerful storytelling tool because you're painting a positive vision of reality rather than so many pieces which are like, let's start as if it's a college thesis by calling out the problem.
Exactly.
And then saying what we do. You're calling out the problem by depicting this positive vision. You don't need to say what the problem is.
For sure.
Because you're showing this. And so I feel like in some ways it's showing your positive impact, but it's also on a brand level, it's communicating so much more optimism. We don't have to talk about the problem. We don't have to talk about our competition, right? We're this elevated, optimistic brand in the way in which we see the world. What about for creative directors and people who are working, at a pretty elevated side on the creative side? What's your advice for them to, stay successful, continue to grow?
I would say you've got to balance following your heart and doing the things you're passionate about, and always striving to do the best possible work you can, while also asking yourself the question, like, am I solving the problem? Is the work that I'm doing actually like on brief, on treatment? Like, have I, when this thing goes out in the world, is someone going to look at it and go, wow, that's beautiful, that's genius, or that's really good, but also, are they going to walk away understanding the story that you were telling? And I think sometimes we can forget that we're telling a story, and a story has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. And at the end, if you don't get it, there's a problem.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and if you are finding yourself in a place where you're not happy doing the work you're doing, give yourself a pause and figure out how to change that, because it's not going to magically happen.
I mean, one thing that comes through from you so much is also, that empathy of seeing these different perspectives. It's not like, hey, we have this creative vision, we know how to solve this. We're going to really understand and be empathetic first.
That's what first person is all about. That's what our name is about. Our name is about empathy. It's about perspective. It's about standing in the shoes of the audience and the other people that we're here to represent. One of the things we say to our team all the time, is not to be creatively selfish, right? When I first moved to San Francisco, I worked for a lot of big advertising agencies, and it was fun, and I did a lot of cool stuff, and I won a lot of awards. And at a certain point realized that that wasn't really the measure of success for me. The measure of success for me was at the end of that story. Like, do people get it? And to do that, I think you have to be empathetic. You have to say, who am I talking to this time? And what do they need to walk away understanding?
I just think from your story, you're someone who's reinvented yourself a few times. Mm-hmm. Part of, I think, being successful in the creative world is constant reevaluation, constant reinvention. It's part of the world, part of the game, part of what keeps it interesting. What do you think, obviously so many changes in the world of storytelling, narrative, marketing, eyeballs. What do you think is the future of storytelling and narrative strategy?
It's a good question. I don't think storytelling is going anywhere. I believe there are a lot of assumptions about how you can crank story out of a generative AI tool today, and a lot of companies are probably going to learn the hard way that it's not going to position them for different. At the same time, I'm really invested in a lot of the new tools and doing some pretty advanced things to take, I would say, what we've learned over the past 20-something years and some of our proprietary data and proprietary frameworks and build them into tools and systems to help our clients be successful. And in terms of the future, for me, I think the future is hopefully being able to continue to do this work in a way where it can happen a bit quicker, because we're able to analyze larger pools of research and talk to more people than we were before at a lower cost, which is one of the gating factors in being able to move the needle in a large organization. We talk to lots of customers when we do this work. We go out and do third-party research. We talk to lots of employees. We travel around the world sometimes and workshop with leaders across different business units and meet them at their home offices. And so to be able to supplement some of that with a perspective that can come together in a week instead of 5 weeks or 6 weeks is a really great advantage. So that's I think most realistic in terms of change. In terms of what happens beyond that, constantly looking for opportunities to think about what tomorrow holds, and the world is changing super fast. So who knows? I think we'll be split between super fast, high-tech AI systems and a new craft movement for the analog, because people are going to get exhausted by looking at stuff that feels a bit plastic.